The night Nathan Calloway showed up at my door, I had flour on my hands and a broken dishwasher running water across the kitchen tiles. I was already on my knees with a towel when I heard the knock, and I almost didn't answer because that was the kind of evening I was having. Everything wrong, nothing dramatic about it, just steady and inconvenient, and mine alone to deal with. But the knock came again.
Harder the second time.
I opened the door still holding the soaked towel, and Nathan was standing on my porch like he had run all the way there. His jacket was dark with rain across the shoulders. His hands were at his sides, but his jaw was tight, and his eyes had that sharp, urgent look that meant something had already gone sideways long before he reached my door. I knew Nathan Calloway the way you know most people in a town with one main road and too many opinions. His family had run Calloway Hardware on the east side of Miller Street for 3 generations. I had bought nails there, a paint roller, 2 sets of cabinet pulls. We had said hello enough times that stopping to talk didn't feel strange, but we had never been more than that. Friendly. Comfortable. The kind of easy distance that works fine when everyone stays on their side of it. He said, "I need to ask you something and I need you to not walk away before I finish saying it." I looked at the soaked towel in my hand, then at him. "You've got about 30 seconds before I go back to my flooded kitchen," I said. He ran one hand across the back of his neck. I watched him look past me, then at his boots, then back at me like he was trying to find the least insane way to say something that was going to sound insane regardless of how he arranged the words. Then he said it. "I need to get married. And I need to do it before Friday." I know how that sounds. I know this is the strangest thing I've ever asked anyone. But I don't have many options left, and I've been standing outside your door for 10 minutes trying to talk myself out of knocking. The kitchen behind me made a small splashing sound. And yet I said, "Here you are. Here I am." I stood there a second longer, studying him. Nathan Calloway was 31, quiet in the way that reads serious rather than shy. He had always seemed like someone who measured his words before spending them. Whatever was sitting behind his eyes right now was not small, and it was not simple. That much I could see plain.
"Come inside," I said.
"And help me with this towel first." That was the first thing I should have questioned. I let him in before I had answers. I should have asked everything from the doorway, and let him work for it. Instead, I handed him a dish towel, pointed at the water spreading under the cabinet, and we fixed that together before we even sat down. Something about that bothered me later. How practical it all started. How easy it was to let him into the ordinary mess of my evening before he'd explained the bigger one he'd carried to my porch. We sat at my kitchen table, with 2 cups of coffee I made, because my hands needed something to do. He held the mug without drinking it at first, and laid the whole thing out plain. His grandfather had passed 8 months earlier. His grandmother had followed in March. The will, drafted years back without anyone looking too hard at the fine print, carried a condition. The hardware store, the building it sat in, and the small warehouse behind it all went to Nathan as the eldest grandchild. But only if he was married by the end of the fiscal quarter. If not, control of the property transferred to his uncle's estate to be liquidated and divided. I watched his face while he talked. He wasn't performing anything. There was no rehearsed softness in it, no attempt to dress himself up better than the situation deserved. "My grandparents were old-fashioned people," he said. "They believed a business needed stability behind it. A family. My grandfather probably wrote that clause when he was 60 and assumed I'd have been married for years by the time it ever mattered."
"But you're not," I said.
"I'm not." I wrapped both hands around my mug. "And you came to me." He met my eyes then. Not with the easy look from across the hardware counter. Something more direct than that. Something that took more effort. "You're the one person I could think of who might actually hear me out before deciding I was out of my mind. I might still decide that." "I know. That's fair." I thought about what I actually knew of him. His parents had moved south after the grandparents died. His younger brother was out of state working a construction contract. Nathan had stayed because the store was still open because someone had to be the one who stayed, and he was always going to be that person. I had seen that particular quality in him across the counter without ever naming it out loud. That specific kind of tired that comes from being the one who doesn't leave. I knew something about that kind of tired myself. My own situation was not uncomplicated. I had been running a small catering business out of my home kitchen for 4 years. It had grown enough to feel real and not quite enough to feel secure. My lease was going up in January. I had one significant contract I was working toward that would change what I could afford if I landed it, and everything in my life right now was balanced on edges. I tried not to look it too directly. That night, I did not tell Nathan any of that. I just listened. "I'm not asking you to perform anything," he said. "I'm not asking you to pretend feelings you don't have. I'm asking for your name on a document." We set a clear end date. Whatever we agree on, I put it in writing first. I keep the store. You get something real out of it. That's the whole deal. What do I get out of it? I asked. He didn't hesitate. He had thought about this before he knocked. Whatever you need. Money toward the lease. A reference for the commercial kitchen license you have been waiting on. I know the building inspector. I know 2 people at City Hall who have been slow-walking applications in your area for months. I know which ones to call and what to say to move it. I've lived in this town my whole life. That access is worth something, and I know it. It was worth something. And I didn't love that he knew exactly how much. I looked at my kitchen. The towels still on the floor. The flour on the counter. The stack of invoices on the end of the table I had been trying not to look at since Tuesday morning. "Why Friday?" I asked. "The estate lawyer has a formal review that afternoon. If I walk in married, the condition is satisfied. If I walk in alone, the clock starts officially, and there won't be enough time to correct it. It's Tuesday night." "I know." I sat back in my chair. "Nathan." "I know," he said again. Quiet. Not defensive. Just honest and tired in a way that kept me at the table instead of walking him to the door. I told him I needed to sleep on it. He nodded, stood up, and carried his mug to the sink without me asking. He washed it and set it on the drying rack, then pulled his jacket back on. "I meant what I said," he told me from the doorway. "No performance. Whatever you decide, the paperwork comes first. You see every line before you sign anything." I locked the door behind him and stood in my kitchen for a long time, listening to the dishwasher still dripping in the dark, thinking about a man who washed his mug before he left. I said yes the next morning. I called him at 7:45 and told him to bring a pen, because I had a list. He came over at 8 with coffee from the shop 2 blocks down. He set mine on the table, without asking how I took it. 2 sugars, a little cream. The same thing I ordered every time I came into a store. I had never thought once about whether he was paying attention to that. That should have told me something. Right then. But I was focused on my list. We wrote the terms together at my kitchen table. 12 weeks. During that time, I would be listed as his spouse on the property documents, and we would make a reasonable public showing, enough to satisfy the estate lawyer and whatever family members came asking. At the end of the 12 weeks, we would begin the process of dissolving it and return to whatever normal looked like by then. He would help me with a commercial kitchen license. He would make 2 specific introductions at City Hall. And he would co-sign a short-term business loan I needed and could not obtain a loan because my credit history was thin and my collateral was mostly confidence and stubbornness. He did not push back on a single item on the list. We drove to the courthouse on Thursday morning. I wore a green dress under my winter coat and told myself it did not matter what I wore. Nathan had on a dark gray shirt that looked new, without looking like he was trying. He didn't comment on the dress. He just held the door open at the courthouse like it was any other door, and I walked through it. At the clerk's window, a woman behind the glass looked at us both with the flat, efficient expression of someone who has witnessed every possible version of this moment without being impressed by any of them. "Names," she said. "We gave them." She typed. We signed. A judge with reading glasses and a coffee stain on his collar said the words in a voice that sounded like someone reading a utility bill. Nathan's hand was warm when he held mine for the part that required it. Not tight. Just there. Present and steady. Outside afterward, the air was cold and gray, and the town kept moving around us the way it always did. Nathan looked at the certificate copy in his hand. "Thank you," he said. I looked at the date printed on the paper. "We made a deal. Save the thank you for when it holds up." He nodded once and did not push further. That was something I had not prepared for. That he would always stop exactly where I set a line without making me explain why the line existed. The first week was the strangest. We were not living together. There was no reason to rearrange our daily lives beyond what the paperwork required. But the estate lawyer wanted a follow-up meeting, and Nathan's uncle had sent messages, and 2 cousins had started asking pointed questions. We handled each one together. Nathan was consistent and calm in every conversation. He never oversold anything. He never asked me to perform something emotional that wasn't there. He just stood beside me or sat across from me at the lawyer's office table and answered questions in a way that was steady, without being scripted. His uncle was the hard one. An older man with a suspicious nature and a large financial interest in things going badly for Nathan. He called twice in the first week, and the second call, he turned his questions on me. How long had we known each other? What drew me to Nathan specifically? Did I understand the weight of being attached to the Calloway estate? I answered plainly. We had known each other for years through his family's business. I pulled back from giving him a rehearsed reason for the rest of it, because honest answers are always harder to pull apart than polished ones. And I told him the estate was Nathan's by right, and I wasn't going to pretend otherwise to make anyone comfortable. There was a silence on the line after that. Then he said, "You sound very sure of yourself." "Usually am," I said. He did not call back after that. Nathan told me later it was exactly the right answer. His uncle respected directness more than warmth and had been waiting for me to crumble into something soft and manageable. Somewhere in the second week, things began to shift without either of us announcing it. Nathan started calling in the evenings, not because something had come up with the estate, but because he had something to say. A situation at the store. A decision he was turning over. Once he called to tell me there was a raccoon living behind the warehouse, and he was now engaged in a standoff. He was not confident he was winning. I laughed. Real and surprised and not planned at all. He said he hadn't heard me laugh like that before. I said I didn't know he'd been listening. He said he had been listening for a while. I held the phone after that and didn't say anything back right away, and he let the quiet sit there without rushing to fill it with something easier. The City Hall introductions came through in the third week. 2 phone calls Nathan made on my behalf, and suddenly paperwork that had been sitting untouched for almost a year was moving. A license review got scheduled. A building inspection was approved. Things I had spent over a year trying to gain traction on were happening inside a week, because Nathan Calloway had picked up the phone and said my name to the right people. I didn't know what to do with that. Grateful, yes. But also unsettled in the way you get when something you worked hard for suddenly comes easier because of someone else. Like the work you put in before still counted, but you couldn't quite see it clearly anymore, through everything else. I told him that one evening when he came by to drop off a copy of the updated property paperwork. He stood in my kitchen doorway and listened to all of it without interrupting. Then he said, "The work you did before is why you knew exactly what to ask for. I just moved a few chairs out of the way." I looked at him. "That's generous framing." "It's honest framing," he said. "There's a difference." He stayed for dinner that night without either of us planning it. I made pasta with what was left in the fridge, and we ate at the table and talked until the sky outside the window went completely dark. He told me about learning the hardware business as a kid, walking the aisles with his grandfather on Saturday mornings while the old man checked inventory from pure memory and never once needed a list. How the smell of machine oil and sawdust still felt like the safest place in the world to him, even on bad days. I told him about starting the catering business with $40 of borrowed equipment and one client who had given me a chance when nobody else would. He said, "That one client." I said, "Everything started with that one person seeing the thing before it was fully built." He nodded slowly and didn't add anything to it, and somehow that was exactly the right response. I thought about that sentence later, after he left, about how he had a way of saying something ordinary that landed heavier than it should have, and then letting it sit without needing to explain it. It was in the 4th week that I found the letter. Not snooping. I want to be clear about that because it matters to me. I was at the hardware store helping Nathan sort through estate paperwork the lawyer had asked us to organize. His grandmother's documents, old correspondence, property surveys, receipts going back 30 years. We were both working through separate boxes at the long table in the back office. I found it slipped between 2 warranty documents for a water heater from 1987. It was addressed to Nathan, written in his grandmother's handwriting, Dated 2 years before she passed. I should have set it back down. I almost did. But the first 2 lines were already inside my head before I made the decision to stop, and once a thing is read it cannot be unread.
So I read the rest.
She had written it clearly, the way people write things when they want to be understood long after they are gone, and cannot be there to explain themselves. She wrote that she knew Nathan would be the one left holding the store. She knew he would put the work before everything else, the way his grandfather had before him, and the way that kind of life could leave a person alone and quiet and very far inside themselves without ever meaning for it to happen. She was not worried about the business. She said that plainly.
She was worried about him.
The condition in the will, she wrote, had not been put there to protect the store or the property or the family name. It had been put there to protect Nathan. She wrote that she did not believe he would ever slow down enough to let someone in unless something made him stop and require it. That was the word she chose.
Made.
She used it without apology. She said she knew her grandson, loved him too well to pretend otherwise, and knew that he would work around his own loneliness like it was just another item on a list that never got shorter. She wrote that she hoped when the time came, he would find someone who already knew the best of him without being told what to look for. I set the letter down flat on the table. My hands were not entirely steady. Nathan was across the room with his back to me, sorting through a box of old vendor invoices. He hadn't seen me pick it up. He did not know it was in my hands. He had no idea what I was sitting with. I stayed very still with what I had just read for a long, quiet minute. The condition in the will was not a hard-nosed old man's business clause about stability and succession. It was a grandmother's last, slightly underhanded, entirely deliberate act of love for a grandson she had known all the way down. And Nathan had not told me that. He had let me believe it was about protecting the property. He had let me write my list of terms and negotiate my conditions and stand beside him at that courthouse without ever telling me the thing his grandmother had actually put down on that page. I set the letter face down next to the water heater warranty. Then I kept sorting paperwork because I did not know what else to do with my hands while I thought through all of it. On the drive home, I said nothing. Nathan didn't seem to notice anything off. He talked about the building inspection timeline, about a supplier meeting, about whether the warehouse roof needed attention before the first real cold snap came through. I answered where I needed to and kept everything else very quiet. That night I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, going back through the weeks with different eyes now. The way you reread something when you realize there was a layer underneath it you missed the first time. The way he had already known how I took my coffee. The way he had always stopped exactly at the edge of every line, without needing to be told where the edge was. The phone calls that had nothing to do with the estate. The dinner that neither of us planned. The raccoon. The quiet he left space for. His grandmother had written, she hoped he would find someone who already knew the best of him. She had not written find someone useful. She had not written find a business arrangement. She had written find someone. I called him the next morning. Not at 7:45. Earlier than that. The sun was barely past the tree line when I picked up my phone. He answered on the second ring, which told me he was already up and had been for a while. I found the letter, I said. Silence. Not the scrambling kind. Not the panicked, backpedaling kind. The kind of silence that comes when someone has been waiting for a specific thing to surface and has already decided how they are going to face it when it does. Your grandmother's, I said. In the back office. Between the warranty papers.
I know the one, he said.
Quiet. She wasn't protecting the store, Nathan.
No, he said.
She wasn't. I sat down at my kitchen table. You let me believe it was about the property. I did.
Why?
There was a long moment on the line. Outside my window, a bird landed on the fence post and sat there tilting its head at something in the grass below it. Because if I told you it was about me, he said, you would have closed the door. And I could not stand there on your porch and watch you do that. That answer hit the way honest answers always do, without softening on the edges. I looked at the table. At the invoices I had not been lying awake worrying about as much lately. At the mug from this morning still sitting where I had left it. You manipulated the situation, I said.
Yes.
You let me negotiate a deal I thought was one thing when it was actually something else underneath.
Yes.
And you're not trying to talk your way around that.
No, he said.
I'm not going to do that. I leaned back in my chair. The winter light was coming through the window at a flat, clear angle that made everything look still. Your grandmother sounds like she was a very difficult woman, I said. Something came through the phone then. Almost a laugh. Low and surprised at itself. She was the most stubborn person I have ever known in my entire life.
She knew you very well. Too well, he said.
I was furious at that condition for 6 months straight. I thought it was controlling. I thought it was unfair and presumptuous, and none of her business. He paused. And then I drove to your street and sat in my truck outside your house for 10 minutes trying to convince myself not to walk up there. And I thought she knew exactly what she was doing. I was quiet for a moment. What happens if I walk away right now? I said. End of everything. The 12-week timeline holds either way, he said. You already signed what needed signing. I honored every item on your list before this conversation, and that doesn't change. The license, the introductions, the loan. That was never about keeping you in place. That was me keeping my word. A pause. You can walk away, and I will not argue with you. I thought about that. I thought about a woman writing a letter to her grandson 2 years before she died because she loved him well enough to see the thing he would never address on his own. The specific loneliness of a person who put work first and called it enough. I thought about a pasta dinner that went until dark without either of us noticing the time. I thought about the raccoon. I'm not walking away, I said. His breath changed on the line. Just slightly. Just enough. But you need to understand something, I said. I'm not staying because of the paperwork. I'm not staying because of the license or the loan or any of the items on the list. Those were the deal, and the deal is done.
This is different from that. I know it is, he said.
And if we move forward from here, it's honest, I told him. No more letting me believe something is one way when it's actually another underneath. Whatever comes next, we are straight with each other. That is the only condition I won't negotiate. That's a fair condition, he said. It's not a condition, I said. It's the foundation, or there isn't one. The bird on the fence post dropped into the grass and disappeared. Okay, Nathan said. One word. Nothing dressed up around it. Just a person saying yes to the thing that actually mattered. I sat there another moment, looking at my kitchen. The invoices that weren't keeping me up at night anymore. The license application finally moving forward. The table where we had eaten dinner and talked until neither of us had noticed it getting dark outside. When I drove to the hardware store that afternoon, Nathan was behind the counter, sorting a delivery. He looked up when I came in, and there was something different in his face. Not relieved exactly. More like a person who had been holding something carefully for a very long time and had finally set it down on solid ground. I put my bag on the counter. That back office is a disaster, I said. You're going to need a serious filing system before this year is out. He looked at me. That quiet, careful look that was starting to feel like the most familiar thing in my week. I probably will. I have opinions about filing systems. I had a feeling you would. I leaned against the counter. Outside the front window, the street was doing what streets do. Deliveries, a woman with a dog, 2 kids on bikes weaving around each other like they had somewhere important to be. Your grandmother would have liked me, I said. Nathan looked at the counter, then back up at me. The corner of his mouth moved. She would have been completely insufferable about it, he said. She would have acted from the very first second like she had planned the entire thing herself. I held his gaze. She did plan the entire thing herself. He laughed. A real one. It came out of him like he'd been saving it up without meaning to. I laughed too. And that was the moment I stopped thinking about the paperwork and the 12-week timeline and the terms and the letter pressed between old warranty pages. I stopped counting down to an end date and started paying attention to what was actually in front of me. The man I barely knew had knocked on my door before midnight with rain on his shoulders and a reason he hadn't given me the full truth of. And somewhere between the flour on my hands and the flooded kitchen floor and the coffee, he already knew how I took it. Somewhere between the raccoon and the dinner and the silence he always knew how to leave room in, I had stopped treating this like a transaction with a deadline and started wondering what it looked like when the agreement became something else entirely. His grandmother had been a stubborn, difficult, entirely too perceptive woman. She had looked at her grandson and seen the thing he worked around. She had looked ahead 2 years to a day she wouldn't be there for and decided to do something about it anyway. Not gently, not carefully, in the most underhanded and loving way she could manage from a distance. And standing here now, on the other side of it, with his laugh still in the air between us and the late afternoon light coming through the storefront windows, I could not find a single thing to argue with about any of it. She had known exactly what she was doing. And so finally did I.